Welcome to Table for One. I'm the narrator, and in today's video, I'll be doing a rules refresher for Nemesis. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to add in the crawl deck. Let's get rolling. So I'm all set up now to teach you about the crawl deck, which is a promotional deck of 10 cards that you can optionally add into your game of Nemesis. So to set this up, it's super easy. You take this deck of 10 cards, you shuffle it up, and you place it next to the board somewhere, and it gives you a new basic action that is available on your turn. And so let's take a look at it here. It's got the rules right on the back of each of the cards. This says you may not be in combat, and the cost to use this action is to spend one card, and this is the crawl action. So I'm sure you can read it here, but it says if there's a technical corridor connected to this room, move to any other room connected to any technical corridor. Before the noise roll, draw one card from the crawl deck and resolve its effect. After that, shuffle this crawl card back into the crawl deck. So for the most part, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I'll put that one there just so we can reference it. So I've got 9 other cards here. So these will all be shuffled, right? And then you may want to take a basic move action, but you don't want to move to an adjacent room. You want to move to somewhere further away. And this can really help you get across the map quickly. And it can also help you get out of some tricky scenarios. One, to either try and, survive, or two, if you're playing the semi-co-op version and you think somebody is setting you up to be, locked in a room with an intruder or something, this kind of gives you another way out. Now, it is similar to the mechanics special ability, but the mechanics special ability, if you recall, allows the mechanic to move through a technical corridor, but the cost is 2 instead of 1. It's more expensive, and the mechanic must immediately pass after taking that action. So the crawl deck seems a little bit stronger, but as you'll see, these cards tend to have penalties on them, whereas the mechanic does not have a penalty. So even though I kind of don't like in principle that the mechanic's special ability is a little bit infringed upon by this crawl deck, now everybody can go through the technical corridors, there is a pretty good balance between the costs and benefits. So let's take a look at what's going to happen to you if you use these crawl cards. So these are just shuffled up, but this one is called Larva. It says when you use this, so you pay your cost, you're not in combat, you draw this top card, you must, when you move, place a larva miniature on the character board, so on your character board, and your character gets 1 contamination card. Now, you are not doing a contamination test, so if you already have a larva miniature on your character board, you do not gain another, you just gain the contamination. And then after this is resolved, you take the card, you put it back in the deck, so somebody else could draw it again, you shuffle it up, and then you just set the deck aside, so this basic action is still available to everyone. I'll take larva back out, and then after you resolve one of these cards, and you put it back in the deck and you shuffle it, then you are in your new room, and then you do a noise roll as normal. The crawl action is a new basic action, so you cannot do a careful movement using the crawl deck. Those are 2 different actions, either a regular careful movement or a crawl. So the next one we've got is something in the slime. You get a slime marker. You can draw 1 item card of any color. If you took this item, your character gets 1 contamination card. This is not an action, and you don't have to pay any action cost. Now, I think some of the wording on here is a little ambiguous. So first of all, crawl is still an action. You have to pay the cost before you take the card. So this is not saying you can crawl for free. This is saying you're getting slimed. You may or may not already have slime, which is fine. And then you can optionally take 1 card off the top of any of the item decks. So I forget the names, but the green, the yellow, and the red decks, not the crafting deck. I think that's fairly obvious. So draw 1 of those cards, and then I suppose either keep it or discard it. But if you do keep it, you take a contamination card, and the taking of the card is not an action. That is what you are not paying for. So it's kind of like getting a sort of free item. So let's look at the next one. The next one is slime. This one says you get a slime marker. So that one's not too bad. I think I just set down 2 though. Yep, there's a couple cards there. So that was slime. The next one, that one's fairly unambiguous. Next, we have dirty scratches. Your character suffers 1 light wound and gets 1 contamination card. The next is panic. If you have a weapon in your hand, discard 2 ammo from it, or 1 if you only have 1. This is not an action, so you do not have action cost. Again, this one I think could be worded a little bit easier or a little bit more clear. So again, the crawl action itself is an action. You've got to pay the cost to take the crawl action. But if you draw panic, I think the way this should be worded is that if you have a weapon in your hand, discard 2 ammo from it or as many as possible. And discarding the ammo is not an action, so you're not paying an action cost for that. Next up is heavy wound, which again is sort of a funny phrasing because the consequence is your character suffers 1 serious wound. So I feel like the card should have just been called serious wound, but there you go. The next crawl deck card you could draw is called crawling. And this says discard 2 action cards but no contamination cards from hand, or 1 if you only have 1. Again, the wording could be a little more clear, but I read this to mean discard 2 action cards from hand, or as many cards as possible, not including contamination cards. So we've got a couple more here. Next we have an egg, and this says, at this point you can perform a pick heavy object action cost of 1, to pick up 1 egg. If you took the egg, your character gets 1 contamination card. So again, a few ambiguous things on here that I want to point out. The use of can versus may, I think is maybe a little contentious in the board gaming community, but I would say may. You may perform a pick heavy object action, so it's optional. You don't have to do it. But if you do, the action cost is 1, and then you can pick up an egg, which is a heavy object, and I would take that directly from the intruder board. Now, I would also say in the rare event that the intruder board has no eggs on it, I would say you can still take 1 from the supply. Because really the intruder board is like eggs from the nest, and you found this one in the technical corridor, so maybe that's a little bit different. So I think you would always have the ability to grab an egg, but if there's any in the on the intruder board, I would default to taking it from there just based off the wording on the card. Gaining the contamination card is not ambiguous at all. That makes sense to me. But the other thing that's not so clear is whether this counts as an action in itself, in that you can take 2 actions per turn. So if you're in a room and say you search, that's your first action, and then after you search you decide to crawl and you draw this card. Crawling is your second action, and this is telling me that I can perform a pick up heavy object action. So I think you get a free third action on your turn. But let's say you don't search. Let's say the first thing you do is you crawl and you draw this card and you decide to do the pick heavy object action. I would argue that's your second action for the turn, and then you must pass the turn to the next player. Because again, the card is saying you are performing an action. So even if you've already taken as many actions as you're supposed to, this card says you can take another, but it does count as an action. So that's the way I read that card. We've got next one here, lack of oxygen. Discard all action cards from your hand. So this just basically makes you pass, and it's going to make you vulnerable to surprise attacks from the intruders. And then there's one more card here. This 10th and final card is phew, nothing happens. So of the 10 cards in this deck, you've got a 1 in 10 chance if nothing happens. The rest of these have some sort of consequence, generally in the form of an injury, losing ammo, losing action cards, gaining contamination, but a couple of them have some sort of side benefits, like you could pick up an egg, you could pick up sort of a random item. Those are not terrible things, but you're taking a risk. And then again, you can't keep track of the cards in the deck because every time one of these is used, you put the card you used back in the deck and you shuffle it up. So you've always got a 1 in 10 chance of drawing any one card. But those are the cards of the crawl deck and how they work. Now, a couple other things I want to point out. Of course, this is a technical corridor here on this room. So if you were in this room and you wanted to crawl, you would go through this technical corridor and exit out of any other room with one of these little red lights. So not all rooms are attached to a technical corridor. For example, This room here has no technical corridor, so you could not use crawl to exit this room, and you cannot use crawl to enter it. Now, I am also showing the alternative side of the base game Nemesis board here. The alternative side is interesting because it has two sets of technical corridors, so it's not explicitly stated. In fact, the rules as written here say that you may move to any other. Let me start over. If there is a technical corridor connected to this room, move to any other room connected to any technical corridor. So this makes it seem that you could go through this red technical corridor and exit out of this blue technical corridor because, again, rules as written state, if there is a technical corridor connected to this room, move to any other room connected to any technical corridor. But thematically, that makes no sense to me. I would argue that if you enter a red technical corridor, you should exit a red one. And if you enter a blue one, you should exit a blue one because they are, of course, different. That's why each has their own noise pool. They're not the same corridor. That's the way I interpret it, but that's only going to affect you if you're on the alternative side of the board. Now, one other question you may have is this compatible with Nemesis Lockdown? And my answer would be yes. All right, so here is the Nemesis Lockdown board, and you can see this room here is connected to a technical corridor. So I would argue that this would work the same way. There's no reason you couldn't use the crawl deck. But again, I am showing you the alternative side of the board because this board has the outdoor section of Mars. And so some rooms, such as these up here in the top left, do not have technical corridors. Instead, they are part of Area 2. So you'll notice that none of these rooms have a number 2 on them. If you roll a 2, this is sort of like a technical corridor. It's just this whole area is 2. So I would say if you're in Area 2, you could, in theory, crawl to any of the rooms in Area 2. So this one here or this one down here. I would say that works the same way for Area 1, but it's mostly useless unless this door locks, as Area 1 is just these two rooms here. You might get more use from Area 4 in the top right. It's these 4 rooms here are part of Area 4, so it's its own little building. So you could, in theory, go from this room to this room. And then finally, Area 3 is outside. I would strongly argue that thematically there are no technical corridors connecting all these outdoor areas. So I would say when you are on the surface of Mars, you cannot crawl. So those are my very unofficial rulings on how to use the crawl deck in Nemesis Lockdown on the alternative side of the board. So there you go. If you have any questions, though, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll try and help you out. If you interpret any of these cards differently, I would love to hear about it. Personally, I like the crawl deck. I like to include it. I think of it kind of like the blood test deck in that I like to include it in every game I play just so I have the option, but I don't necessarily use it every game that I play. I use it when it is situationally helpful. So as far as expansion stuff goes, I like it because the overhead is really low. The setup is super easy. There's really no difficulty to adding it in or deciding not to include it. Either way, it's not really a big deal, but it can give you some fun options. So that is the crawl deck. Now, don't forget, I am in the season of Nemesis right now. So I am putting out a series of rules refresher videos like this for the Nemesis and Nemesis Lockdown games. And I'm also doing solo playthroughs to demonstrate these different modules and actions. So if you'd like to see the crawl deck in use, it will be available in the solo playthrough that I released today, and then all the rest of the solo playthroughs going forward for Nemesis on this channel. So feel free to check that out. And if you want to see the other Nemesis videos as this series continues, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like here if this is the type of content you like. Don't forget you can head over to my Ko-fi page, ko-fi, link in the description. And of course, you can always share the video with somebody else who you think might enjoy it. But that is what I've got for you this time on Table for One. I hope I was helpful. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you in the next video. Take it easy.